And yeah, yeah,
Hello everyone. I hope you're all doing good. Thank you for attending and I welcome you all to this Ask Me Anything session today. I'm Sadamini, an intern with Animal Ethics team in India. Today, on the occasion of World Day for the End of Speciesism, we at Animal Ethics are hosting a new series of Ask Me Anything session in multiple languages on what speciesism is and why is it important to put an end to it. World Day for the End of Speciesism includes animal rights groups around the globe organizing events to highlight speciesist discrimination and demand that the interests of animals to be fully protected. Speciesism, in brief, is an ideology that considers the lives and interests of animals as not worthy of respect simply because they belong to other species. Today, we have with us Aditya, who is an animal ethics representative from India. Aditya and I will be discussing about the speciesism and we would answer a few questions raised in the forms shared on social media platforms. Please feel free to ask anything related to the topic by typing in the comment section in the live stream. Thank you. So, without any further delay, Aditya, can we start the discussion? And maybe you could talk a little about speciesism and then we can go ahead to discuss about these questions.
awesome. Thank you, Sadamini. Hello, everyone. And as Sadamini mentioned, I will start off by giving a small brief about what is speciesism and why is it important to reject it. Um, so, as Sadamini had earlier mentioned during the introduction, speciesism is an ideology where we discriminate against the interests of individuals based on their species membership. Speciesism is similar to racism, sexism, casteism, or any similar forms of discrimination where we discriminate against individuals uh, based on unjustified factors. Um, so, for example, a skin color or the gender of a person is unjustified in the same sense that uh, discriminating against individuals based on their species membership. So, the interests of an individual animal uh, belonging to a certain species in not suffering is similar to that of an interest of an individual human not being discriminated against just because of their skin color or the gender. There are different forms of speciesism. The most commonly held forms of speciesism is called as anthropocentrism, which is the view that the interests of humans count much more than equally strong interests of non-human animals. Um, for example, uh, eating the flesh of an animal uh, and the pleasure that it provides to humans is considered much more than the amount of suffering it causes to the the animal whose flesh it belongs to. So this is anthropocentrism, but there's also other forms of speciesism, which is not discriminating between humans and animals, but also between two different species of animals. Um, uh, for for example, one of it could be discriminating against species based on their relation with humans. If it's a dog or a cat or a companion animal that we share a stronger relationship with, we value their interests uh, more than the interests of an animals that we don't share a relationship with. Similarly, it could be based on their how valuable they are from a conservationist point of view. If it's an endangered animal like a panda or a one-horned rhinoceros, their interests are considered much more than, for example, if they're considered as a vermin, uh, where they are usually killed in harmful ways. For example, a wild boar or a rat. There's also other forms of speciesism where we discriminate against animals based on how aesthetically pleasing they seem to us. If it's a panda, a cute puppy, or an animal that's cute, we value them more than an animal that we usually consider as ugly from the society standards. So yeah, these are different forms of speciesisms, but uh, the end point is speciesism is an unjustified view. It is morally wrong to hold speciesist beliefs from uh, based on many different ethical theories. It doesn't matter if you are a utilitarian, a deontologist, if you hold any different forms of ethics, you can still come to the conclusion that speciesism or unjustified discrimination is morally wrong. Um, yeah, so this is basically what is speciesism and why it is important to reject it. There are many arguments usually given to defend speciesism, but most of these arguments, when scrutinized uh, under different frameworks, like, for example, argument from species overlap or argument from impartiality, which I can go into deeper. Or if you want to learn more about these arguments, I would recommend you check it out on our animal ethics website, where these arguments are laid down in much more detail. So you can see that most of these arguments that are usually used to defend speciesism fail. So based on this, we can conclude that speciesism is an unjustified and morally wrong worldview to hold. Yeah, so this was a brief about what is speciesism and why it is important to reject it. Once we reject speciesism, we would change our behavior and attitudes to ensure that we take into consideration the interests of all sentient beings. Um, yeah, I forgot to mention that to be an anti-speciesist, what we consider as the moral baseline is the capacity to have positive and negative experiences, which is uh, if the being is sentient or not. So that is what matters when we decide to extend moral consideration to a being. Yeah, so these were the different things that I wanted to talk about with respect to speciesism and sentience. But I think we can discuss more about this as we delve into the questions that were asked in the form.
Yeah, I
So,
think that is a good idea. True. Um, so the first question is from Antonio Olmo. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name in a wrong, pronounce it wrongly. And the question is, I'm a vegetarian and an effective altruist who sympathizes and supports the general efforts to combat speciesism. But I'm worried about the lack of nuance and the sweeping generalizations that I found in most sources and events. Specifically, two. He has two concerns, and the first one is the evidence seems to indicate that only some animals have sentience, only some can feel pain, and only some have feelings. If those are the criteria to grant animals rights and to consider unequal treatment, discrimination, we should never talk about animals and instead be more specific. So, do you agree with the fact that only some animals have sentience? And what are your views about this?
right, that's an interesting question, and thanks for reading out the question, Salamini. Um, so, with respect to the first part of the question, which is only some animals are sentient, I think it is very hard to be sure of which animals are sentient or which animals are not. This relates to something, a concept in philosophy called the problem of other minds, which is we cannot know for sure if another being is sentient or not. We don't know what their experiences are like. The best that we can do is we can use arguments from inference or analogy, where we can try, for example, I know that I am sentient, and now I can look at similar traits or similar features in other beings, and through that I can try to infer that they are also sentient because they share these behaviors or they share these traits with me. So that is the best we can do. And there's also another problem in philosophy and theory of mind, which is called as the hard problem of consciousness, which is we don't know what is the function of consciousness for sure. We don't know how consciousness arises in our mind. So unless these foundational questions are not solved, we will not know for sure which animal is sentient and which is not. Um, yeah, so Uh, Regarding the second part of your question, which is if those are the criteria to grant animal rights and to consider unequal treatment as discrimination, we should never talk about animals. And I think that's a fair point. Um, However, I should note that I think you must be aware of it. That there was something called the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness, where some of the leading scientists across the world and theorists who are working on the theory of mind and stuff, they came together to sign a declaration that humans are not unique in possessing consciousness, but uh, many animals, including all mammals, birds, and even many invertebrates like octopus, possess the neural substrates to possess consciousness or to have conscious experiences or to be sentient. So, while it is a fair point to say that we should not talk about animals, but we should talk about sentient beings, I think that there is still a lot of progress to make in terms of determining if all animals are sentient or not. There are a lot of factors to consider here. And I would agree with your point in the sense that it is also possible that in the future we might have artificial entities and not biological entities that do show indications of sentience, that do satisfy the criteria of sentience. So, in that case, from an anti speciesist viewpoint, we should also extend moral consideration to these artificial sentient entities and not just to biological entities. So, in that sense, animals are probably the term animals is functionally useful in extending our moral consideration to all beings that do show evidence of sentience. And I'm not using it as an ends in itself that all animals deserve moral consideration, but to the extent that all the animals that we know of are sentient, we should extend moral consideration to them. So that is what is my view on this. And to answer the third part of your question, which is it perfectly moral to breed and eat oysters or crickets? And I think this relates to the first point which I made, which is we don't know for sure if they are not sentient. So from that uncertainty, I think we should be cautious in uh, in justifying breeding and exploiting or harming oysters and crickets. For example, with bivalves, I think it's an edge case. Uh, there is, while they do not have centralization of nervous system, they do have ganglia and they do have a nerve cord. There has been evidence that they do exhibit movement to find an optimal place to consume food and to receive sunlight. So there is some slight amount of evidence to show that there is a possibility, there is behavioral and physiological evidence to show that there is a possibility that they might be sentient. Um, so, given this uncertainty, I personally would advocate for a precautionary approach, which is to err on the side that given the evidence or given the reasons we might have to assume that they are sentient, it is better to not harm and exploit them, because if they did turn out to be sentient, then the harm that we would be causing them would be significant. So that would be my line of reasoning, and I would consider it not right or not uh, not truly anti-speciesist to justify consumption of oysters because we are still unsure if they are sentient or not. Similarly, with crickets, I think there is still a lot of uncertainty around invertebrate sentience uh, as a whole, but they do show some complex behavior. There is like a social dominance structure within the cricket communities that I've read about. And they also do possess a very rudimentary physiological structure that allows them to process information. There is some centralization in their neural structure. So, given these uncertainties, I think I would be cautious about uh, claiming that it is perfectly moral to breed and eat oysters and crickets. So, I think we should take a more cautious approach when we are talking about invertebrate sentience. Yes, there is mm, no certainty regarding the sentience, but we do have very strong evidence. I wouldn't say very strong, sorry. I would say we do have some evidence to show both behavioral and physiological to show that they might be sentient. So, following that line of reasoning, I think we should be cautious and take a more precautionary approach. But yeah, so Damini, do you have anything that you want to share on that point?
Okay, yeah. Actually, the fact that you talked about these ganglia, so these are supposed to be considered to be the forerunners for the developed brain in the future. So yeah, in one point or the other, they still have this nervous system, which comprises these nerves, and somewhere they have this sense, the they can perceive things, like most animals, these invertebrates also, they try to protect themselves from the predators, or they run up, they look for food and all. So this clearly gives an evidence that they can perceive threat, or they can perceive stuff. So I think we should consider the likelihood that they are sentient, and better not to harm them, like you pointed out. So yeah, that
Yeah, I
could be one
completely
point to add
agree
up.
with that. Yeah.
And there is another part to his question, and the question is like, even when we consider higher mammals, which certainly experience pain and are sentient, for example, a cow, even then, people believe that a human life is more important to the vast majority of the people. They believe that human life is more important. So, the usual talk about discrimination of other species seems to ignore the fact and suggest that pulling a lever to kill two cows so that one human could be saved would be discrimination and morally wrong. So, do you agree with the line that a human life is more important? And if you do not, don't you worry about the extreme position that we will be in, that will keep the anti-speciesism in, um, because vast majority of people will never agree to it. That's the question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I will try to answer the question in parts, and maybe then Sodamini, you could also share if you have any thoughts on that. Um, so first, you claim that a human life is more important because the vast majority of people have that intuition that a human life is more important, irrespective of uh, other mammals also having the capacity to experience pain and pleasure. I think somewhere here, one would be, if one claims that a human life is more important by default, I think one would be resorting to this fallacy called as circular reasoning, or it's also called as begging the question, which is you don't substantiate on why you feel that a human life is more important. Sorry, why a human life is more important, but you just assume it by default. So why is a human life more important? Because we are human. So this kind of circular reasoning, I think, is a form of fallacy. I think we need more stronger reasoning to claim that a human life is more important, which I don't think exists. And also relying completely on intuitions that people have, I think could be not the most reasonable way to tread forward, because if you go back 100 years before, many people probably had the intuition that slavery was okay or sexism was okay. So intuitions are not always a reliable indicator of what is right and what is wrong. So an approach that is taken usually in ethics or philosophy is you look at what your intuitions are, and you look at some moral principles that you hold in high regard, and then you that or it need not even be like a moral principle that you yourself hold, but something that society values. And for example, you might value caring about suffering, and then you kind of try to balance your intuition with the moral principles, and then you reach like a middle ground. So this process is called as reflective equilibrium. So for example, you might think that a human life is more important, and on the other end of this spectrum, you have a principle that we should care about suffering. um, and then you might see that your intuitions are probably biased, and just caring about human life or just caring about the suffering of humans is probably not addressing the moral value that you hold. So trying to introspect more and engaging in more discussion between, or trying to address the tension between both of this, I think would probably help in coming to a better conclusion, rather than just solely relying on your intuitions. So when this partly addresses the second part of your question, which is pulling a lever to kill two cows so that one human could be saved, would be discrimination morally wrong? From your question, I assume you feel this is troubling to you. So I would say that if you go like this thought experiment could also be extended to humans. For example, okay, there are two children and there is one adult here. Someone would be fine, like, pulling the lever to kill an adult to save two children, or so different ethical theories would bring you to different conclusions in this thought experiment. But from an anti-speciesist viewpoint, let us assume that in the future, many of us would agree that we should not discriminate against individuals based on their species membership. Uh, from that paradigm, it would be morally wrong to kill two cows to save one human from a consequentialist worldview. Again, I'm taking a consequentialist worldview uh, which values consequences and not the act. So this is just a certain subset of ethical theories that I'm considering to make the point here. But this could be addressed from different uh, paradigms. But I will not be getting into it because I think that will make it more complicated. But from an anti-speciesist worldview, yes, I think it would be morally wrong to kill two cows to save one human, all else being equal. You could bring in other contexts. For example, if you say that one human is my family member, then that would probably affect my decision. Or you could say that both the cows were already aged and they were dying, whereas the human was a more healthy person and he was able to have, uh, he has many more positive experiences that he could experience in his life, whereas the cows are anyway close to death. So all these factors again would probably make this thought experiment much more complicated. So I would probably not talk about it at this point. But yeah, that is also something to consider into the thought experiment. Um, so finally, answering your last part of the question, which is, if I don't agree with the statements that you made above, which I don't, uh, wouldn't anti-speciesism forever be uh, considered extreme? Um, yeah, I think this is a reasonable point you make, which is, since the the ideology that we are trying to challenge is a minority. I mean, sorry, the majority. The ideology that we are trying to challenge is a majority, and the views that we are trying to promote are still a minority. Wouldn't not subscribing to the intuitions of majority keep us always in obscurity? Um, and to this, I think I would try to look at other forms of prejudices, like, for example, racism or sexism, where at one point arguments against these were considered to be minority, and they were not considered serious by the vast majority of the population. But they did actually create progress in the attitudes of people. I mean, I guess it was creating awareness about the arguments against racism and sexism, along with other institutional changes that created the change. But I think creating a shift in the attitudes is very, very important in uh, creating a change in how the society perceives the discrimination against non-human animals based on their species. So yeah, I would say that it takes time. For example, anti-speciesism in 1970s was much more rarely found. Like the anti-speciesism activism was much more rare in 1970s as compared to today, where it's much more talked about. That veganism is growing very fast, and the interests of animals are being taken seriously uh, in many countries. So yes, I think challenging these views, challenging the speciesist paradigm is very, very important to create progress. Um, but I am interested to also hear Sadamini's thoughts. Sadamini, do you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, like you pretty much told about most of the thoughts that I was having. But yeah, I totally agree with the point that you know having like totally depending only on intuitions to take decisions is not up to the mark. We need to really think about it and make a decision. So yeah, probably I would really appreciate that point that you made. So if you're done with this question,
Great.
we can go to the next
Yeah,
one.
I think I'm yeah, I think I
I think you
thought I
pretty much answered it. Yeah, that's it.
yeah.
So the next question is from Elif Ozdemir. Ozdemir. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. So the question is, how sure we really are about invertebrate sentience. Consciousness seems to be evolved because it allowed individuals to make choices when confronted with unpredictable situations. Is invertebrate behavior varying enough to make us think that they behave consciously? Is there any anecdotal evidence? So this is about invertebrate sentience.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question, and thanks for the question, LF. Um, so this is something that even I'm very interested in. As I mentioned in the first question, we cannot really be sure about what the experiences of these individual animals are like. Um, for other mammals, maybe there are more similarities between humans and other mammals, so there might be a higher likelihood that there are the factors that are causing us to have conscious experiences are also present in mammals. But as we move farther away in the evolutionary relationship between humans and that individual animal, I think it becomes more tricky to kind of get get a good estimate on how likely it is that they are sentient, or how what their experiences are like, because their behavior is very different to different stimuli, and the physiology that they have is very different than mammals. So yeah, I think it gets into a tricky territory there, and we can look at different indicators to get an estimation of how likely it is that they're sentient. As I mentioned earlier, we can look at their behavior, their behavioral complexity. Uh, we can also look at their physiology, if they have uh, the any kind of structures in place to process information uh, in a conscious way. We can also look at the evolutionary logic. We can look at how likely it is that they are sentient, or how uh, evolutionarily how valuable would consciousness uh, be in maximizing their fitness. And I think I kind of agree with the second part of your question, which is that consciousness seems to have evolved because it allows individuals to make choices when confronted with unpredictable situations, to increase the chances of their survival. So I guess I broadly agree with that, but I think uh, there is still a lot of debate surrounding what is the function of consciousness, or what caused consciousness to arise. So there are a lot of open questions which are still, which still, which there is still no consensus about. Uh, so yeah, I would still hold my uncertainty about invertebrate sentience. But I would still like to mention that I think there is a growing amount of evidence pointing to the likelihood of many invertebrates, like octopus or uh, honeybees, having uh, strong amount of evidence that they are sentient. Yeah, so uh, answering the second part of your question, which is invertebrate behavior varying enough to make us think that they behave consciously? And this reminds me of the concept of behavioral flexibility, which is, do animals actually choose from the different objects available in the environment, or do they act in a more automatic manner, like in a more stimulus way, where they are not consciously processing things, but they are actually unconsciously choosing different actions. And I would like to bring up an example or a study that I read about ants. Uh, for example, ants do take into consideration the different objects available in their environment. So there was this study where if ants did try to use tools available in their environment to carry sugar and water back to the hive. For example, when a sponge was dropped, the ants did learn that the sponge can absorb the, the sugar water, and they would take the sponge and use that to absorb the water and take it back to the hive. In fact, they would also tear the sponge into different, into smaller pieces, because that would make it easier for them to carry the sugar water to their hive. And I'm also reminded of another example. I'm not. I would highly recommend you watch this documentary on Netflix called The Octopus Teacher, where they show how intelligent and complex the behavior of invertebrates could be. In this case, octopus, where the octopus uses the coconut shells to cover itself from predators, and it walks in such a way where the shell completely covers its body. So there is some sort of self modeling here. The behavior shows such complexity where they are using the environment. So I think the more complex the behavior is, the stronger is the likelihood that they are not acting in a more automatic way or in a more unconscious way. And because this behavior can be more easily explained if the being was actually conscious. So yeah, I think there is a lot of positive evidence about invertebrates having the capacity to experience uh, things in a more phenomenal way. So yeah, I think I am more positive about many invertebrates having the capacity to have sentience. But again, I think we should take a more precautionary approach. And again, I would not be very sure because, for example, with jellyfish, I would be less sure that they are sentient because there is, from what I've read, there is less centralization and there is no structures that allows them to process information in a centralized way. And there's just a nerve net that they have. So I am less sure about them. Um, but yeah, this is a very interesting question, and I hope that with more research, we will get um, more certainty about which invertebrates are sentient and which invertebrates are not. But yeah, so Damini, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah. About the behavioral approach that you talked about, I think I have a point to add here. Like, um, these honeybees, they have this, which are highly social animals. They have this special dance called waggle dance, in which they share with the other bees about the location of food. Like,
Right.
it is with reference to the sunlight, and that's how they show the other bees where this particular food is located. So yeah, that should explain in some way that it invertebrates could also be sentient.
Right. Yeah. And that also reminds me the same example which you're talking about, the waggle dance. So apparently different species of honeybees have different forms of waggle dance. So the behavior which they show to communicate to the rest of the hive about the direction of the food source is different. But there was also evidence that two different species of honeybees learned their language in a way. If you consider their movement as a form of language, they did learn the language of the other species of honeybees. So this, I personally feel like this indicates a form of sophistication uh, in their experience. So I personally would place a significant amount of credence that it is highly possible that they are conscious and they are experiencing the world in a conscious way, and they do have suffering and positive experiences. So yeah, I I would like to direct the viewers to a blog that we had written on our animal ethics website, which delves deeper into invertebrate sentience. We have looked at the behavioral indicators of invertebrate sentience, as well as the more physiological indicators of sentience among different invertebrates. So yeah, I think you should definitely check that out. For me personally as well, that blog was pretty interesting, and I learned a lot from that. So I would highly recommend you check that out. And I also think we have a video on invertebrate sentience on the YouTube channel. So if you're interested to learn more about that, I think I would, uh, yeah, I would suggest you check that out as well. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yes, okay. I think I think this is the end of these questions. There are no questions in the live chat.
Uh, no, I don't see any questions in the live chat as well. Uh, yeah, I don't see any questions as such, but yeah, I would. My closing thought would be that yeah, in the past few centuries, we have constantly been extending moral consideration to groups that were excluded from a moral consideration. We have rejected discrimination of individuals based on their race, based on their gender, based on their sexual orientation. So I think we are at the right time to also reject discrimination of individuals based on their species membership, because accepting speciesism, I think, is one of the most harmful and dangerous attitudes to hold, because the consequences of holding that form of prejudice is causing enormous amount of suffering and harm to unimaginable, astronomical number of beings, whether it is through direct exploitation by humans for the purposes of food, entertainment, experimentation, or it could also be uh, the exclusion of the suffering of animals in the wild, where we are neglecting or ignoring how they are suffering because they belong to a different species. So I think rejecting speciesism is very, very important. And my heart goes out to all the anti-speciesism activists around the world who are trying to demonstrate and who are trying to create awareness about speciesism and are requesting people to reject speciesism. Um, and yeah, sometimes when I think about the consequences of holding speciesism, it really pains me. So yeah, I would really urge the viewers of this live stream to strongly consider uh, becoming an anti-speciesist, and I mean rejecting speciesism, and at the same time also creating awareness about anti-speciesism among your network, and asking people to reject it. Yeah. Um, uh,
I think there's one question. So can
mhm.
we take it? So the
Sure. Yeah.
question, yeah. So the question is: are there any good ways to make people who are speciesists see that their beliefs are causing harm that should be avoided?
Um, yes. That's a good question. So yeah, a vast majority of people don't care about animals, and it's incredibly sad that animals are excluded from their moral consideration. And I think partly these this view is because of the education or the indoctrination or the values that they are taught as a child by their society, by the all the institutions that are present. They reinforce speciesism. They reinforce that animals do not matter. So yeah, that's incredibly sad. But it is positive to see that in the past few decades, awareness about anti-speciesism has been growing, and people are increasingly caring about the interests of animals, and many legislations are being passed, many institutional changes are occurring, which are taking into consideration the interests of animals. Um, Personally, I think advocacy about anti-speciesism is super important. Uh, Outreach in different forms, which could be in the forms of documentaries, which could be in the form of webinars, sharing on social media, um, publishing information in different languages so that people are more aware about what is anti-speciesism and why they should care about the interests of animals. Um, and yeah, I think it's a multiple strategy approach. We need to use like different tactics to create awareness, to educate people, to change the institutions that reinforce speciesism. So yeah, I think it would take a lot of us standing up and voicing out against speciesism, that would cause a more social change to occur where more and more people care about animals. So yeah, that is how I view the change occurring. But also interested. So Damini, do you have any thoughts on what you think could be done to change the beliefs of speciesism, and
Yeah,
how
I get
get
it.
people to care
Yeah.
about the harm?
The first thing is like education, obviously, like you said, and probably, helping them understand the way they are understanding stuff to just change the direction of it. There was time when there was discrimination between blacks and whites, and now we are much developed from that place and we are in a different position. That's because people understood how it is working and how people change their thoughts. It's probably helping them in understanding that, and education, yeah, of course, that stands, like you said.
Yep. So yeah, I agree with what you said. Education seems to be like a very crucial tool in creating uh, changes in the speciesist belief system. And I personally have also seen, uh, just talking to people and educating them about how their belief is causing a lot of harm to these animals has changed their views, has made them to reconsider their choices. So yeah, I'm very positive about it. And thank you so much for everyone who attended this live stream. Incredibly grateful for all the work that you guys are doing, for your questions, and for also attending this live stream. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for attending, and do check out do check out more stuff about animal ethics on site.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much. Have a great day, and let's create an anti-speciesist world. Thank you so much, and have a good day. Bye.